Hello, welcome back to Breaking Down Buhurt. I'm Sean Roberon, the team captain of Green Mountain Hermits, which is the melee team for Vermont Armored Combat. And today I'm here with Colby and Will. And so, Colby, who are you?
I'm Colby. I'm a duelist with the team, and I also am the club treasurer. Yes.
And you are?
Hi, I'm Will. I am a duelist as well, and I guess the club founder.
Tell me a little bit about that history of how VAC started, when members started jumping on board, what your desire was for starting this club.
Well, yeah, it was maybe 4-ish years ago, and I moved to I think it was like 4 years ago, and I moved to Brattleboro, and maybe a little less than that. And now that I'm thinking about it, and I needed some training buddies. Like I had been near the Knights Hall in Nashua, where it was an easy trip to train, but then in Brattleboro, it was a lot harder to find anyone to fight. So I started running a class in Side Stream down in Brattleboro in the Cotton Mill building. And I had like a weekly class, and I worked with Tony, who runs that studio there. And she helped like advertise for it and everything. And it just didn't really bite until I went to a Brattleboro gallery walk and put on some armor. And I had a friend who was also a very good fighter named Brian Duranti came down, and he put on his armor too, and we wandered around together and showed off our swords, and we ran into Colby. And and so it was Colby and Arden and one other person, and they were like my first students. So it was like then it became a class, and so then I started figuring it out as I went.
And how long were you doing stuff with the Knights Hall? How long were you involved with that before starting this club?
It was a couple of years.
Cool.
I started right in. It's kind of weird to say like with the Knights Hall, because when I started training was right in COVID times. So I was kind of with like socially distanced, like with like talking on Facebook Messenger with other fighters and getting recommendations on videos to watch and stuff as far as like figuring out the sport. So I kind of had to piece some of it together myself. And then when the training started in person, it was like very, the Knights Hall was very good about having masks and, temperature checks, and we were socially distanced, and we kind of slowly worked our way closer and closer to each other. So, but we made it work.
Cool. And what was your whole desire was just trying to get this club together so you would have people that weren't, at 2 hours away to have to go and play with?
I mean, that was the initial goal, and it was something really fun, and I wanted to find people to share that with. And yeah, so my goal was to like find cool people that were fun to fight with and have a good time, and then not think about it as any kind of income generating anything or anything like that, which was a little more the motivation of the studio, because that's kind of what their deal is. And so that's where I kind of fell short as far as like doing the weekly marketing of like getting a big turnaround on a class, because I was more interested in a couple people that were really interested. Like Colby came in and was like super obsessed and wanted to know everything and wanted to train all the time. And for me, that was awesome. And Colby versus like 10 people who just want to show up once a week and just do it that week. Colby any day.
Cool. And tell us about national competitions. You both have participated in national competitions, and I would just like to know what that type of experience is like. What should someone expect when they're going into national competitions? How do you prepare for them? That type of stuff.
Would you like to start, or shall I? I've been talking.
I think why don't you start this one? I'll jump in a little bit and talk about my experience. But because for me, I will say when I was preparing for my national experience, I went down to Carolina Carnage. I was just like asking Will, like, what should I be doing to prepare for going to to a national competition? So why don't you start with what
Okay.
you were doing?
I guess, well, first and foremost, you know, drink enough water. Sounds stupid to say, but I've never experienced dehydration like I have getting ready for a fight, and getting ready for, you know, that and taking the flights and stuff. But preparing for a big competition, it's mainly about getting out of your own way, I guess, because the only thing different about fighting a bunch of those people somewhere else is that they are somewhere else. They're just because they all come from another somewhere else to come to that place to fight doesn't inherently make them better at the sport. It just means that they're prioritizing the sport more.
Right.
And that was a little mindset thing that I had to get my head around. I've only competed twice on a national level.
And what were the two?
It was the U.S. qualifying tournament that decided the duelists that would go and fight internationally and represent the United States, and then it was another tournament that was it was the Wandering Sword Projects tournament. I think I'm saying that right. A fighter named Spencer Waddell. You can find him on Instagram, Simply Samurai. He posts like crazy. He put together a duels tournament at the Arnold Convention Center in Columbus, Ohio. And that wasn't like officially a national tournament, but because it was like a big event that he was bringing the duels tournament to, and he had a big rep, it turned it to like a national level event, just because enough people from everywhere wanted to come. And so those were the two I competed at. I was very happy with how I did, and I had a great time, and made a lot of good friends that I had only known on social media, which was cool. But yeah, so I think the biggest thing is that not to let yourself get intimidated by the circumstance that you're in.
Right. Yeah. Don't always throw your head into thinking, well, these are the best of the best. These are all the people who had the ability to get to this location today.
Exactly. And some of them are the best of the best.
Right.
And then there's a bunch of other people too.
But don't scare yourself into that thought.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what about you?
Yeah. Well, from my experience, I definitely... Will told me like a week or so before I left, it was like the same thing. Try to get out of your own way a little bit, or like don't get in your head too much. And that was like, I mean, how can you not when you're, loading your stuff up on a plane, you're checking your baggage, you're hoping that it's not going to get lost on the plane, because that would really stink. You're flying down, you're renting a car, you're driving to the place, like all that. And then it's like 8 a.m. in the morning, you're finally going to get to the fights, you're doing fighter check. It's like the pressure is definitely on. It was stressful, a lot of anxiety, but also it's, if you can kind of get out of the anxious mode and just appreciate, like, even from a third eye view, which is what I try to do a little bit of, like, well, look at this, look at all these people who, the biggest event I've been to had 30 fighters at it. And so to see like hundreds of fighters at this from all over the globe, I was like, this is really cool, and so, I don't know. That was my whole thing, was really trying to get into that mental space.
Third person appreciation.
Yeah, and being like, wow, look at this. Like, you're going here, and, you've been training hard. For me, I think before it ran up to it, I tried to, for my workouts, just up the weight a little bit, up the intensity of my things, really trying to push, like, get to my really exhaustion point, and then like just make myself go a little bit further each time. That was like my big training thing. And then just a lot of time on the Pel too, to just keep trying to drill in some, like, get rid of some bad habits that I have, which I definitely didn't get rid of them on the competition. Definitely went back into some old habits, but hopefully I did a little bit less than I would have. And then we organized a bunch of, like, on Sundays we'd spar and do some, steel sparring, and some other fighters came. Ringo came, and we did some like really intense, like, this will be way more fighting than you'll probably do the competition in a row, but let's just do like these really exhaustion kind of rounds. And that really did help to be like, wow. I remember like last weekend I did something that's way worse than my 2 rounds that I'm going to get with this one duelist right now. And then I'm going to have like 20 minutes to sit around and like wait and see what happens, So yeah, that was my experience. I also I didn't progress all the way to the end, but I did progress in both of my pools for the 2 categories I was in. So I was happy I didn't go down there and just get a whole bunch of losses and be like, well, that was a lot of money to just find that out. You know what I mean? So it was cool to feel a little bit of satisfaction of like, oh, I took some wins, took some losses, but did better than, I thought I would.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, that can be a tough what if. Like, what if I just go and lose? And then
You get that one round that entire weekend.
you're like, it's literally 3 minutes of fighting.
Yeah.
Or thousands of dollars that you might have spent to get somewhere.
Yeah.
So,
Oof.
Yeah.
And then that gets us into, and we're talking about the money that we're spending, the lifestyle to it, get into that professional versus amateur. We've had conversations about this just between us, but I'd like a little bit more like detail, in-depth discussion for the audience of like, what is the difference between somebody who's looking at this like a hobby, just like this is just something I'm having fun with, versus somebody who wants to take this seriously and think of themselves as, well, I want those golds. I want to go professional. I want to compete. I want this to be something that I take more seriously.
Shall I jump in?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is mostly about you today. You are the guest on the show today.
Yeah, I would say, well, there is no one line in the sand because no one's really a professional in the sport.
Right.
In the classic sense where they are making enough money to cover the expenses it takes to do it.
Right, because the literal definition of amateur is just someone who loves what they do, and then professional, you get paid for it. Not a lot of money in the sport.
No. So you have some really, 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 really good amateurs that would be professionals if there was sponsorship in the same way there was with other sports. And I think the biggest thing.
Nobody's got Pepsi logo.
Yeah. There's no you don't see it on the tablet.
Right.
But I think it's in the mindset. I think it has to do with. I hear some people talk about this and write about this on social media and stuff, and I think I agree with it. And that it's like that more professional mindset is it's a daily mindset for this as a sport. Like every day you're doing something in relation to you being good at this sport that you're doing. Whether that is your super intense workout days, your rest days, or you're going through a low key cycle or a ramp up cycle to a competition like Colby was talking about with essentially kind of like a fight camp style way of push harder than the tournament. We'll push Colby hard enough that the tournament will seem easy. Right. And so that kind of thing where you're just every single day you're making a choice for it. I think is where I would say that's where the professional mindset is in the sport. Even if it's just oh, I won't go out to the bar tonight and hang out with my friends because I'm meeting up for practice tomorrow and I want to be in good shape for it. Anytime you make a decision for the sport and doing that on a relatively daily basis, whether I would say is that's the professional mindset.
The conscious choice to at times prioritize the armored combat.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Gotcha. All right.
I like that definition.
Yeah.
I like that definition for sure. And I think that it's kind of inspiring to hear about and the way when you put it that way, because I think, some folks who might be watching this, and I know maybe some, you might feel this way too, Sean, but calling it a hobby doesn't quite cut it sometimes, especially with the amount of thought that goes into and the amount of space in my brain that this takes up. It's obscene.
Well, even I feel like a hobbyist when I discuss it with others, but then with that type of definition, I go, I do think about it pretty often, and I do practice pretty often, and I have goals in mind
Yeah.
that have to do with taking it more seriously. So maybe I'm not a hobbyist after all, but I mean, like, I feel very playful about it.
Yeah.
But I guess being playful but professional can go together.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
they go together quite well.
Yeah.
Yeah, my wife and I had had to have a conversation a while back where she had to be like, "Listen, we're not going to call this your hobby anymore because it's just it's not your hobby. Like when we think about our planning for our summers, things like that, it's just if we think about it as a hobby, then it just we kneecap ourselves later on because it's not prioritizing it in the right amount that we're actually trying to.
That's
So
a
she
good
was like-
conversation.
so
Yeah.
for me, so she was like, "We're going to call this your passion." So it's like cool, and that works. That translates well.
Cool. Cool. And now getting into the longsword, because we at VAC have gathered like somewhat of a reputation amongst people that we go and we fight with that like that's kind of what they expect from us if we go to an event. Why such the interest in longsword from you as the team founder?
Well, I grew up doing a lot of foam fighting, or boffers. When you say foam fighting, it sounds cooler. So I heard other armored combat people call it foam fighting. So, but it's just PVC pipes with piping insulation. You hit each
Yep.
other with it, and that's the style that I learned when I was a kid. It's just 4-ish foot long swords. You use two hands because you're a scrawny little kid and it's hard to hold. And you wiggle it around and try and hit the other person. And then I started getting into more formal martial arts, and I started doing a lot of Japanese martial arts in my teens. And that's a two-handed curved sword. But a lot of it translates. So when I got into armored combat, I was like, that's the sword that just makes sense. And that's, you use your whole body. And, instead of blocking, you're trying to move or, and you're trying to do a lot of different things at once versus like the sword and shield. And I think, sword and shield fighting is the mainstay of the Knights Hall in Nashua. That's like the kind of our northeast epicenter, and
that's because they have a high focus on the melees. Like and that ends up being, you don't see a long sword in a melee. You'll see a great sword, but a lot of time you won't see a long sword in a melee.
And when I showed up, I was like, "Oh, I don't want to learn how to use that. I want to learn how to use this." And they're great, and they're like, "Well, fine, okay, you can use this instead." And so I think the reputation comes primarily kind of in response to like the more sword and shield focus of the Knights Hall community, and that it just kind of stands at odds. And it's the thing I feel most comfortable showing people how to use because it's the thing I'm best at. So when people walk through the door, it's the first thing I'll hand to them. I'll be like, use this sword because it's the best one. it's cool. So, yeah.
And that's cool to create that separation, but also that mutual appreciation of what both groups are like hyper focused on. Yeah. And when it comes to the longsword and everything about it, what do you find to be the thing that I guess we've already talked about it, the differences. Yeah. You've had this experience, you've done it before in your past, you find that just seems to be the thing you enjoy the most. Okay.
Well, one other thing I will say about longsword in Buhurt is that aside from there is so much more shield and buckler work in Buhurt as a sport that longsword is, and longsword and pole arms are like the other ends of things where like the two-hander stuff that you see and two-handed axes and stuff that you see used. But so much of Buhurt is like punchy shields and punchy bucklers to grapple and things like that. It really is a very peripheral thing in the sport to have to block and strike at the same time, which I think is interesting in the sport because it adds a fun dynamic skill to it.
That's a cool way to describe it, like that difference between like having a shield versus not,
Yeah.
and the one weapon,
Yeah.
and being in those duels, and how you lump polearm into that category with longsword. Because my brain wasn't thinking about that at first, but it makes a lot of sense what you're saying about that. Yeah, cool.
What I've heard people say is that those types of duels, like longsword duels in particular, are almost like its own, and polearm probably too, but those are like its own, almost like a different sport than what other people are doing if they're going to do melee, like pro fighty stuff.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're together because it's still swords and armor and stuff and fighting, but it's like, I don't know what an equivalent would be, like snowboarding to skiing or something,
Yeah.
or not even snowboarding to skiing, but maybe like, slalom skiing to just casual snowboarding or whatever, or like doing tricks on half pipes and stuff. It's like there's snow and there's things on your feet and boards and you're going down a mountain, but you're doing very different things.
Very different skill sets being used.
Yeah.
Cool. And then we've got a bunch of events coming up in June that I wanted to talk about. We've got the Knights Hall, who will be hosting us at their space from 5 until 7 on June 1st. We were going to be doing an event called Battle of Bands, but we had very low ticket numbers, so we ended up canceling that event, and we're getting set up with the Bellows Falls Music Festival instead, which is going to be happening in June as well. But first, the Knights Hall. They're hosting their own event from 7 until 9 on June 1st, and it's a big melee-focused thing that they're going to be doing. And so we will be there from 5 until 7, kind of hosting a dueling thing, more focused on that. And so we'll be able to get longsword and sword and buckler if people do want to do polearm, if anybody's around wanting to do that. But that'll give us that dueling opportunity from that 5 until 7 slot. And then for everybody who wants to stay, we're hoping to kind of like wrangle some of those people to help be part of the 7 until 9 slot as well for the melees to really get the numbers up. And that'll be down at the Knights Hall in Nashua, and you can purchase tickets to their events on their website there. Then we've also got the gallery walk again. That'll be on June 7th, and that'll be from, what are the hours that runs? 5 until 9? Is that usually the hours for the gallery walk as a whole?
Yeah.
And we'll kind of be there from like 5:30 to 7:30 doing fights.
Yeah.
Would that be? Because I know
something
we'll be
around
here
that.
around 5, but then we're setting up and all that type of stuff. So
Yeah, get there early.
yeah, and we'll be every half an hour or so putting on another couple of demo fights for people to be able to see what it's like. And then we've got the Bellows Falls Music Festival that I mentioned. We're getting set up with them where we'll be doing some more demo fights, being able to show off what we do kind of in between the musical sets that are going to be happening. When they're taking their breaks between one band and another while they're setting up, we'll be doing demos and showing off our stuff there. And then we've got Mutton and Mead Roads to Revelry, which just came to mind because you brought it up, like, hey, what about this place? I reached out to them, and then I remembered in my conversation with them that I had actually talked with them years ago when doing lightsaber training stuff with people when I was running a theater in Ascutney. And in the discussion, they were like, would you want to do that again? So I think I am in like the later evening. But during the time when we have sunlight, we'll be doing our armored combat stuff, and we might be utilizing some of our sponsors at that time, like our prize pools that we got from Cobco in Charlestown.
Okay.
So we might be getting people like Sam, how do I pronounce her last name? Ari?
So Samurai, it's Sam Arai,
Samurai. Okay, okay. All
His
right.
actual last name is Sam Preston, but
Oh, okay. Samurai.
but his fight name is Samurai. It's
Gotcha.
a samurai joke.
I get it now.
Yeah.
All right. So,
I
'cause
never put that together.
So, I know that they're very interested in coming to the event because
Right.
they're a big nerd and they love Warhammer miniatures, and that's some of the prize pool.
Yeah.
They were actually bugging me about that at the
Nice.
event that I was at this last weekend. They were like, "So, when's the event that's going to be taking place where I can get some of these minis?" And so, I think we'll be able to get him, and he's a gold medal duelist.
Yes. Gold medal nationally and gold medal internationally.
That's
He
amazing.
just got gold in Mexico. So.
Yeah. And so hopefully getting him for the mutton and meat and other people as well for that. Because we'll be doing more official fights for that rather than like gallery walk or the music festival, where it'll be kind of more demo stuff that we'll be doing.
Yeah.
Great.
So yeah, any of those events, you can find them online and be able to get interested and connected with those. And then when it comes to connecting with us, you can just email worldunderwonder@gmail.com, and I would get back to you to communicate with you about our mission statement. And if you've been watching this show up until now, you've heard Colby and I talk about the mission statement that Will put together originally, and how we look for new participants and what we're looking for in those potential new members. And so you can reach out over email or find us on Facebook and send a message there, and we'll all see it, and someone will get back to you about that.
Oh, a fun note about the mission statement.
Yes.
I did not actually write it.
Oh.
My wife wrote it.
Oh, okay.
She's way better at putting sentences together.
Gotcha.
And it was way too important for me to try and string it together. So while I made dinner, she wrote that for us.
Awesome. Well, then that's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that at some point in this year, we also want to do another cheese cup.
Yeah, that'd be really fun. That'd be really fun to get off the ground.
Just got to figure out where, but I know we've got the Reavers who are interested in bringing a list.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we end up wanting to do it, we just need to pay them for gas to be able to get the thing here. But they're willing to let us use a list and be involved in that event.
Okay, that sounds great then.
Yeah.
I would love to make that an annual thing.
Mm-hmm.
We'll celebrate some Vermont pride with some big chunk of cheese.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and do you have anything else that you'd like to share with the audience before we end today as our guest?
Thanks for having me. And if you are interested in checking us out, please don't hesitate. Even if you don't think this is for you, it probably still is for you if you want to be part of the community. That's what makes it for you. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows that. And that even if you don't want to compete, even if you don't want to get hit in the head with the metal sword, we love having folks around to help us make the events happen and make the fights happen too. So if you want to be a part of the community, there's various different places that we would be very, very grateful to have anyone.
And that's always a great thing to keep reminding the audience, that you don't have to be a fighter to be in the community.
Yes.
Yeah, 100%. Right. So thank you very much for watching another episode of Bringing Down Buhurt, and thank you, Will, for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.